So glad that you've decided to be a part of church this weekend across the whole church. Second week of this series that we're in, Pursuit, this idea of talking about building the kind of marriage where we pursue God and pursue each other. And as I launched into this last week, and I said, for some of you, as we're talking about marriage, you're really excited about it. You're really excited for your spouse and you to connect around this series. Others of you, maybe one of you is excited and the other one in the marriage isn't. Then there are those of you that are thinking, I'm going to be married someday. I should probably lean in and listen in because I want to make sure I understand what biblical marriage is about. And then there's another group of people who are saying, man, I really don't like this topic. I'm not interested. I'm not even sure why I'm paying attention. But we said the truth is the majority of people in our culture, even today, still, they get married. And most of us either are or will be married. And we need to understand what this means. And if we're Christians, we need to understand it from a biblical perspective. And if we're planning or engaged or in a dating relationship, we need to understand it. And even those of us that are single, we need to understand it so we can encourage our brothers and sisters to what kind of marriage they should have. We can pray for them. And even we can understand the principles that make sense for us in our lives. And so we talked about how this series was going to be PG-13. We're going to be getting into some things even today where if you're not comfortable at any campus with your child being in the room, you might want to get them back to Grace Kids. We talked about how our culture is having a lot of conversations about marriage. We're also trying to understand, as we think about marriage, how this is such an important environment for the sanctification process, the change process that God has in our life. And marriage is this really unique picture of how God feels about us, of how God interacts with him as the groom and us as the bride. So how do we understand those principles and apply those to the marriages that we have or that we're going to have? And yet, as many of us are married, sometimes within a year, sometimes many years down the road, we find ourselves going, man, the marriage I have is just not awesome. I'm not psyched about it. I'm not really sure. Am I just stuck with it? Do I just kind of have to be here? I don't know what to do with the gap between what I'm experiencing and what I expected. And we said, so for this series, what we wanted to spend some time doing is trying to address that gap from a Christian perspective. And so we said it a little differently last weekend, but this is really what we're trying to do. We want to close the gap between the marriage we want and the marriage that we have. We want to close the gap between the marriage that we want and the marriage that we have. So we want to think about what are some practical biblical realities that we would be able to make sure we build the marriage that we hoped for, create it. And we spent a good amount of our time last weekend really leaning into Ephesians chapter 5 and saying that if we're going to close this gap and we're going to go from what we have to what we want, we're going to have to understand that biblical marriage is built on this idea of mutual submission. Two people who are mindful of the other person, trying to love and care about them. And we said at the core of biblical marriage is this idea that's at the core of what it means to be a Christian. It's at the core of what Jesus is all about and how he has lived for us. And we said, if we're going to get a biblical marriage, we're going to have to pursue each other. And the way we're going to pursue each other is this, that the marriage we want requires moving towards each other through service. That we're going to have to move towards each other through service. And that you can't do that from a distance, that you're going to have to pursue him and she's going to have to pursue you and you're going to have to do all that stuff. And as that happens, you're going to look at them, they're going to look at you, and you're going to move towards them and they're going to move towards you, and you're going to keep doing that dance over and over, and you're going to serve one another. You're going to pursue one another, that it's not just going to happen, that it's going to be real work. And we talked about every great marriage has one divorce, and that divorce is from your personal selfishness, that you have to lay down your selfishness and all the things that are about you and say, nope, I want to serve you. I want to connect to you. And we talked about the way this looks is that the wife has to work really, really hard to champion her husband, and the husband has to work really, really hard to cherish his wife. I didn't say it this way last weekend, but I got at it because the truth is, friends, the male ego can be just as fragile in a different way as sometimes females' emotions. And so how do we come alongside, meet each other's needs in unique ways, champion, cherish, serve, be committed to that, and really make that go? And I said last weekend we needed to understand that principle about biblical marriage, and then we needed to get to one key thought in our minds, one mindset that we all had to understand, which is that we would come to a place of this foundational reality where we would say, I believe my marriage can be better. And what I asked you to do was to go home and to look at your spouse and to look them face to face and say, I believe our marriage can be better, so I'm going to play to win. I'm not just trying to get through it. I'm not just trying to get to the end. I'm not just trying to get the kids out of the house. I believe Our marriage can be better, so I am in this. I am going to play to win. And we said if we could get to that mindset, then we would move from there and we'd start to talk about some things, all right? That's where we landed last weekend. If you missed it, encourage you, go on the app, go on the website, catch up, because it's really important stuff that we laid out last weekend. Now, I'm gonna give 2 examples of this that have happened in my life, and I bet they've happened in your life in some capacity. So over 19 years ago now, I became the pastor of Grace, and I was coming out of the marketplace where I worked as a chemist, and it's a weird story. And I remember like praying with Cal. I remember being in our house and having a conversation about this is what we're gonna do. And I was telling the leaders at the time, like, I'm excited to be a pastor at what was called then the Grace Brethren Church of Pickerington, and I'm all in. And I remember like, okay, preach my message, and I understand that. And that was like my first weekend. And then the very first Monday of my job as the pastor, I remember driving to the old church building and pulling into the parking lot and getting out and unlocking the door and going into my office. And I remember thinking, now what? I have no idea what to do. I had a ton of zeal in my heart. I had a ton of passion. I had a ton of enthusiasm. I was super excited. I was ready to storm the gates of hell through my church. I was ready to do all of that. And I had no idea what to do. Do I call a meeting? I just sit in my office and pray all day? I just work on my sermon? Do I go to people's homes? I have no idea what to do. And I found myself going, now what? Fast forward a few years, and Kel and I found out we were gonna be parents. Kel was pregnant. And so I'm all in. I'm excited to be a dad, and I'm praying about being a dad. And I'm even picking up some books and talking to some parents about being a dad. And I'm really excited to be a father. And Kel goes through the process of getting pregnant and having the baby and going through. And I remember being in the hospital. I'm like holding my son. I'm holding Caden James. I'm a dad, really excited about that. And then I remember after like 48 hours, they came in and they said, you can go home now. And I was like, what? They were like, you can take your son home. And I remember, I'm like, I don't even know that I know how to put him in the car seat right. And then we put him in the car seat for the first time, and we carried him outside, and we put him in the car. And then if you've ever been in this place where you drove so slow, and anyone who got anywhere near you, you were ready to run off the road or tell them about it, right? And then I remember we got home, and we walked in, and we put the car seat down, and he's just there, and we're looking at him, and I remember thinking, now what? Now what? And it wasn't a now what because I didn't have passion. It wasn't a now what because I wasn't excited about it. It was a now what because I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know what to do to be the pastor. I didn't know what to do to be a dad. And here's what's just true about your life. You've had those moments. I said it to you this way in your notes, that we all find ourselves at now what moments where we're uncertain of the next right steps to take. We all come to moments in our life where we're like, now what? What is it I'm supposed to do? I don't really know the next step. I'm not sure what I can do. You're in, you're committed to it, you're excited, but you don't know what to do. What is the next right step I'm supposed to take? And so last weekend I got y'all fired up and I said, who believes that their marriage can be better? I believe that we can win. I believe that we can win. You were ready. You were all in on your marriage. You were excited. And then some of us, we looked at our spouse this week and we said to them, I believe our marriage can be better. And I'm playing to win. And then you thought to yourself, I don't know what that means. I don't know what to do. What you thought was now what? Now what? I'm committed to, I am fired up. I want to move towards. I want to serve. I want to pursue. I want there to be service. I want there to be mutual submission. I'm ready, but I don't know what the next right steps to take are. And if we're gonna actually have better marriages, we're actually gonna have marriages where we practice this pursuit and this servant thing, and we're gonna have mutual submission, and we're gonna get to better. Well, getting to better is gonna require this reality, and I'm gonna say it, and then I'm gonna unpack all of the words in it because it's really important. Getting to better is this. It's gonna be knowing and doing the right steps to staying in love. It's gonna be knowing and doing the right steps to staying in love. Now let me start at the end of this sentence, and I picked the word staying in love on purpose, because here's what you know, here's just what's true. Falling in love is easy, staying in love is hard. Anybody can fall in love. You can see the person walk down the steps and their hair move the right way, and you can fall in love. Falling in love is not hard. Staying in love is hard. Staying in commitment is hard. Mutual submission and service is hard. And what the next steps are to getting there means you have to know them and you have to do them. For all of us who are married, as it relates to moving to a better marriage, for some of us, the problem is we just really don't know what to do. We're excited, but we're now what? I don't know what steps to take. I'm not really sure where to go and how to move forward. For others of us, the problem is not that we don't know what to do, we're just not doing it. We've actually been to marriage seminars, we've read marriage books, we've heard marriage teaching, we've paid attention to what the Bible says. We know what to do, but we're not doing it. And if we're gonna move forward this weekend from saying, I want better, I believe we can have better, I'm after that, I'm passionate about it in my heart, then we're gonna have to know and do the steps to take that steps of staying in love. You know, when I talk to people about this idea and when people try to put words to what are they looking for? What do I want in my marriage? Some people will say the word, I wanna be happy. But the word that people end up saying the most when you dig below the surface is they say, I wanna be connected. I wanna have a connection. And what's interesting is you start to ask people, what does that mean? And I want us to think about the idea of staying in love equals the idea of pursuing better connection. It's the idea of being connected. And when you ask people, what does it mean to be connected? What most people do is they give you the things that make them feel connected. But what I'm trying to ask the people is, what does connected actually mean in your soul? What's it mean in your brain? What does it mean in your heart? When you say you're connected, what's actually going on? When you say you're not connected, what is there an absence of? What is it that you need to know and do so that we can get to connected, so that we can stay in love? And so this is what we're trying to move towards. This is what we're trying to serve towards. This is what we're trying to mutually submit one another to. This is the idea of connected, and it's long. Connected is both the feeling and the function. I'll unpack this. Connecting is both the feeling and the function that we are in it together. That we are in it together. And it's a result of being seen and supported. Connection is the idea of feeling and function. It's both experience and emotion. It's both, I can grasp it and I can't exactly grasp it, I just feel it. And it's this idea that we're on the same team. We're rowing in the same direction. We're after the same stuff. We want the same stuff. I'm not talking superficially, but in big ways, you're like, we're going after, we're in it together. And the way that happens is that each spouse feels seen. They feel noticed. They feel valued. They feel observed. They feel adapted to. They feel special, and they feel supported. They feel cared for. They feel like the person's trying to make an effort. They feel like they're a priority. They know their love language. They understand their personality, and they're helping them out in it. And if you take any of this away, you start to feel not connected. So for some of you, you're in a marriage where you're supported, but you don't feel seen. For some of you, you feel seen, but you don't feel supported. For some of you, feel seen and supported, but you don't feel like you're in it together. And there's a bunch of things that go into this. There's a pragmatic day-to-day, there's romance, there's personality types, there's kids, there's no kids, there's trauma, there's difficulty, there's pain, there's heartache, there's all of this. But what we all want is we want better connection. We want to feel this. If you're married, this is what you really want. You want to know that someone is with you, and they're like with you to the point where they've noticed you, they've paid attention to you, they've adapted to you, they've cared about you, they've served you, they've loved you, they're supporting you. In fact, it's in this place where in the Bible there's 4 kinds of love. 4 words that are given to us for love. One of those is the Greek word storge, which is protective love. One of those is the Greek word phileo, which is friendship love. One of those is the Greek word eros, which is romantic love. And one of those is the Greek word agape, which is God's conscious love to love us from his will. Marriage is the only place where all four of those show up. You don't have that with your buddies. You don't have that with the girls. You don't have that even with a brother or sister in Christ. Someplace that goes. But to be connected, all four of those things show up. And when you start to remove one of them, man, we may have great romance. We may have great passion. Our bills may be taken care of, but I don't feel safe. I don't feel protected. You may feel protected. The bills may be taken care of, but he's not a friend. Connected is when all of it comes together. When all of it plays out, and some of you are like, dude, you are setting the bar so ridiculously high. You are setting us all up to fail. Do you think any of us are actually going to be able to do this? I believe our marriages can be better. I believe we can get after this. I believe through mutual submission and service, beginning with Kel and I, all the way through the church, we can do this better, where we work towards connection and remind ourselves, even if we don't get all the way from here to there, we're gonna kill ourselves playing to win to get there. We're gonna go after it. We're gonna pursue it. And here's the other thing, and this is what we're gonna look at. You all actually did this already. The problem was you did it when you were dating. And then you stopped. Because what we have to do this weekend is we actually have to do what we did in the beginning in the course of our marriage. If you've got a Bible, I want you to open it up to an obscure book that most of the time you don't read in your Old Testament, called Song of Songs. Song of Songs. Or Song of Solomon, it might say in your heading. And if you're familiar with this book in the Bible, it's about a romance between a man and a woman and them falling in love and moving towards marriage and their dating process to the point where they get married and they consummate their marriage. And it tells us their story about how they feel about each other and how they love each other. And it comes to us from Solomon. And the dialogue is back and forth between the man and the woman. Now, this book is hard to get through because it's poetic, and so for some of us, particularly men, we don't enjoy it because we have a hard time getting past the poetry to the principles, but that's what we need to do. And we've talked about this at different times over the course of my time at Grace. Years and years and years ago, we did a series at Grace called Red Hot Monogamy. And in that series, we spent time talking about this book. And it was actually over the course of last week, as I was thinking about where I was going in this series, I found a message from that series, and I was like, yeah, that's what we need to talk about. That's what we need to understand. That's what we need to make sure we do to understand how to serve and play this out. And so where we're gonna land today is we're gonna start in Song of Songs, chapter 1, and we're gonna look at these two dating, and we're gonna look about how they feel each other, or feel about each other, and how they love each other, and how they care about each other. And we're gonna look at their passion and their desire, and we're gonna pull some principles out of it and think about how these relate to our marriage. And to be honest, this couple, when we begin to see them, they're the kind of couple that some of us, when we see these couples out on a date, we don't like them. They look too happy. They look too connected. And that makes us suspicious. And yet, I think if we see what they're doing and some of the things going on, it'll give us a chance to be connected. So this is in Song of Songs, chapter 1, picking it up in verse 12. And in your Bible, you'll see it goes back and forth between she's talking, then he's talking. And so in verse 12, it says this: while the king was at his table. Much of the setting in this book is out in a pasture or where they're out dating, hanging out. But here, they're talking about the king, the man. While he was at the table, my perfume spread its fragrance. What the person speaking here is saying is that my man could sense what I smelled like. In fact, my presence in his life was like the constant fragrance of me being around him. He knew what I smelled like. He was close to me, then he knew what he smelled like. And then when I would leave, like if you've ever been with your spouse or when you were dating and they would like hang out and they like lay on your shoulder while you were watching a movie, and then they leave and you're like, I can still smell her shampoo. She's like, yeah, he could smell my presence. In fact, my entire relationship with him, he just thinks about me like the fragrance being around him. And he says, my beloved is to me a sachet. She's talking about herself now. My beloved, my man to me, he's like a sachet of myrrh resting between my breasts. Women back then would almost wear these necklaces of potpourri made up of myrrh, which was this unique gum stuff that came from Arabia that smelled well. And they would wear this around. And she says, my man, like, he's so pleasant. His smell is so good. His presence is so much. It's like wherever I go, he's just there hanging out with me. My beloved, my man, this is her nickname for him. He is to me as a cluster of henna blossoms from the vineyards of En-Gedi. Now, En-Gedi is this deserted area that's in the Middle East, and it's an area where there's not a lot of stuff. And so when water shows up or when flowers show up, it's this beautiful thing. And she says, my man is so special. He's like a cluster of henna blossoms. Now, ladies, I'm not suggesting this week that you call your husband a cluster of henna blossoms. There are other pleasant ways you can speak to him about how significant you think he is. But both of them are noticing here, this person's importance to me. When I see them, I know their smell and their presence is with me wherever I'm going. It continues as we move from her speaking to he speaking. How beautiful you are, my darling. This one's pretty straightforward, except this right here is his nickname for her that he uses throughout the book. So he's got a nickname for her. He's got a pet name for her. And he says, how beautiful you are, my darling. Come on, we're talking about connection. We're talking about that feeling of seen and supported and in it together. Come on, man. When's the last time you just looked at her and said, you're beautiful? You're beautiful. I see you. I notice you. You're gorgeous. The text continues, and how beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful your eyes are doves. Now, doves, is silly as that sound, is actually a step up from what he referred to her earlier in chapter 1 as. He called her an animal that wasn't very pleasant, and now he's at least moved to calling her a dove. But what he's really saying is your eyes are tranquil and beautiful. And in this culture, beautiful eyes were synonymous with beautiful character. So he's not only complimenting her external beauty, he's complimenting her godliness, her character, her nobility. And he's saying out loud these things that he sees. We talked a little bit about this last week, and that one of the things we should do better in marriage is when you see something great, you should say it. You should make it a habit, and you should add it. You should say, I love you because you're an incredible mother. I love you because you take care of us. I love you because you feel safe. I love you because you have beautiful eyes. I love you. I love you. And he says, I see you and I notice you. And your character is beautiful as well. It continues, goes back to her. How handsome you are, my beloved. She uses his nickname. And how charming. She compliments his character externally and internally. Ladies, when's the last time you looked at him and said, you're a good looking man. You're a respectable, honorable guy. You know, you're trustworthy. You work hard for our family. You really lean in to take care of the kids. And they're just speaking these kind words to each other, building their relationship. Come on, y'all did this when you were dating. This was natural when we were dating. It was intuitive when we were dating because we were trying to get them. We were trying to get them. So we just said this stuff. And it's just flowing out of them in the relationship. It goes on. And she says, and our bed is verdant, which literally translates, and our couch is green. You're like, I don't know what that means. You're gonna have to help me out on that one. Our couch is green. What they're referring to here is their spot in the pasture where they fell in love. They used to take walks. They used to then hang out in the pasture. They would walk in the meadow, and then they would look up and they would lay down and they'd look up at the sky and they'd sit under the trees and they'd talk and they'd tell each other their dreams and they fell in love. And she's just looking back, reminiscing about that. In fact, she continues and she finishes it this way, or he goes, and he says, and the beams of our house are cedars, our rafters are firs. What is he referring to? He's like, yeah, I know that spot. I remember that spot when we were sitting on that green spot looking up and the firs were there and the cedars were there. That was incredible. I remember our spot where we fell in love too. And then they keep moving forward, and it says this as we move to chapter 2. She says, I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. Now she's actually confessing some of her insecurities still, because what she names are two really common flowers. In fact, a rose of Sharon was a very common flower that most people thought wasn't spectacular at all. What we learned earlier in chapter 1 about this woman was that she was dark complected, which meant she didn't come from money. She was outside all the time, and she was very insecure about her appearance. But she's moved from just focusing on her complexion to she actually says, well, at least I'm a flower. I'm a normal flower, but at least I'm a flower. And in her insecurity, her man comes to her aid. And look at what happens next. He says, like a lily among thorns, baby girl. Compared to everybody else, they're thorns. You are a good-looking flower. You're my darling among the young women. He's like, stop it. You're beautiful. Compared to everybody else, you are gorgeous. You are spectacular. And I know what's happening. Some of you want to throw up about all this. Like, this is ridiculous. Are you really telling us I'm supposed to go home and go, look at your eyes, they're doves, you're a flower, yay? No. But what I am telling you is to go home and say, I see your beauty both internally and externally. I remember when we fell in love. Man, when I go somewhere, when I leave, you go with me because I think about you, because I care about you, because we are connected. And then it moves on in verse 3 and says this. She keeps talking, like an apple tree. Don't use this one, ladies, but she's complimenting him. Like an apple tree or apricot tree among the trees of the forest is my man among the young men. And you know an apple tree, like if you're just walking along the forest and you're just seeing tree, pine, oak, and then you're like, apple tree, that's cool. She's like, yeah, amidst all the trees, you're like an apple tree, baby. You stand out. You are spectacular. You are beautiful. Again, she's complimenting. She's leaning into him. The dialogue continues, and it says this, and this is where it gets a little bit odd. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit sweet to my taste. Some of you are like, what is happening now? Thought they weren't married. They're not. And what she's saying right now is, your character, your love, your safety, protect me. Remember, she was a person that didn't have wealth. She was outside. She says, I'm able to come near you. I'm able to be around you. You protect me in your shade, in your fruit, your love, your care for me. It is beautiful. But what you need to know is she's starting to wonder in her mind a little bit about what it's going to be like when she gets to marry this guy. She's starting to move to go, man, this passion, my attraction, your character, my love for you, can we get to the honeymoon? In fact, as she continues and says some things here, she says, let him lead me to the banquet hall. Let's go out to dinner. Let's have a date night. And let his banner, his security, his character, his person, his protection. See, in a war, you would take a banner of the king that you were fighting for, and you would go into war, and then they would yell, fight to the banner, fight to the banner. And everyone who was on that side would come to that banner, and then you would know the people around you were protecting you. And she says, this man, he fights for me, he protects me. Let his banner be love. Strengthen me. And this is crazy. Why does she say, strengthen me with raisins? Some of your translations will say raisin cakes. Refresh me with apples. Scholars would say that raisin cakes and apples in this culture were actually aphrodisiacs. And she's saying, I'm so attracted and moved to him. I want to stir this physical love inside of me, for I am faint with love. I am blown away by my passion for this guy. And then, this is really crazy in Hebrew. This is what she's thinking in her head. His left arm is under my head, and his right arm embraces me. Some commentaries I read said that she's actually visualizing and begin to think about intimacy with him. That she's actually thinking about him curled up next to her and his hand beginning to wander, which is why she says what she says as she keeps going in the part. Daughters of Jerusalem, it's like she's daydreaming all this, and then she paused and she goes, ladies, if you're gonna get in a relationship, I charge you by the gazelles and by the does of the field, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. Man, this thing I am feeling for my man, my beloved, is so strong in me. Don't go down this path until it's time, because I am ready to connect with him physically, and I can't yet, and I love him, and I think about him. So just chill. And then it pivots. And what we see next is they transition. We don't know how much time they get ready to go on a date. Listen, she says, my beloved, again, her nickname for him. Look, here he comes, leaping across the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Again, ladies, don't refer to him as a gazelle or a stag. But she says, here comes my man. It's date time. And here he comes, he's pulling in. I can see him from a distance. I'm looking for him and I'm so excited. The text goes on. Look, this is kind of weird. There he stands behind our wall, gazing through the windows, peering through the lattice. I always feel like somebody's one. I mean, it's a little creepy. He's not being a peeping Tom. He's just anxious to see her, and he's excited. And so he shows up at her parents' house, ready to pick her up. And he's like, where is she? Where is she? Where is my darling? He's looking for her. And then it continues as they move on. My beloved spoke and said to me, arise, my darling, my beautiful one. So she, come on, baby, let's go. We got to get going. Come with me. See, the winter has passed. And he uses this metaphor about the beauty of love being created in spring. And spring is a season of life. The rains are over and gone. Flowers appear on the earth. The season of singing has come. The cooing of doves is heard in our land. He's just speaking to her poetically about, man, our love is in a great place. Let's go hang out. Let's go enjoy each other. And then the text continues. The fig tree forms its early fruit. The blossoming vines spread their fragrance. Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. He's like, we got to go. We got reservations. I want to be with you. Let's get to dinner. Man, this is going to be good. Then we move to verse 14, and he begins to transition. My dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the hiding places on the mountainside, show me your face. He's again saying, come near me. Come connect with me. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your face is lovely. Just see the ongoing kind words. Come near me. I want to protect you. It's going to be okay. He then moves forward and he says something really interesting here next. He says, we need to catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, our vineyards that are in bloom. He says, baby, we got a good thing going on. We're in love and we're passionate. We're moving towards marriage. And then he says, but what we need to do is we need to pay attention to the things that could destroy our love. He says we need to catch the foxes. We need to get rid of the little things so they don't turn into big things. They then wrap up the chapter in verse 16 as she then speaks. My beloved, my man is mine and I am his. He browses among the lilies until the day breaks and the shadows flee. She's going in her mind to their wedding night. Turn, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the rugged hills. And she's referring to her own body that she wants him to be with her. I just want to ask, and I know that this is poetry and we're having fun with it. However long you've been married, how many conversations and sparks and passions do you have that are like that? I see you, I love you, I can't wait to hang out with you. When I'm not with you, I miss you. I want to be intimate with you. You make me feel safe. You are my, But again, when we were dating, no, you hang up. No, you hang up. Right? When we were dating, you said stupid stuff. You did silly things. You were all in because you wanted to create connection. We both did. Ladies, back then when you were like chasing and you were in, you're like, I'll go to the game. You put on a jersey. Now he puts on a ball game in the room. You're like, dude, another game. Guys were like, the ballet, I love the ballet. I'm in. Now you're like, Dancing with the Stars again? Can we watch something else? Like, what I'm trying to get at is we used to do things to get them that we've stopped doing to keep them. In fact, what I want to say to us is if we could understand what they were doing here and what made their romance work, even as you go through the book, is that we've got to pursue connection by this way. That as it relates to connection, you have to harness the same energy you used in creating it into keeping it. You've got to harness the same energy that you used to create it into keeping it. What you did to get, you should do to keep. And again, this was intuitive. We pursued the sparks, we fanned the flames, we did all the work, and we were making these things happen because we wanted the person. And when we were pursuing the person, we were creating connection. And then we got married and we stopped in keeping connection. And what does it look like? What does it look like to truly pursue through service, through love, through words, through work, through passion, to say, I'm going to harness the same energy I used to create our relationship, to keep our relationship. I'll incriminate myself as I was reflecting on this. When Kel and I first started dating, she lived in Columbus. We were both in college, but she lived in Columbus in the summers, and I lived in Akron, and then we were at different schools. And the one particular summer when we started dating, I worked for I had a job where I had to be up at 6:30 at the job. I was working for grounds crew for Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. And so I had to be at my job at 6:30 in the morning. I would go to my job, I would work, and then after work, I was playing college basketball, so I would go lift, and then I would go train. I would do all my shooting drills. Then I would go eat something real quick, and then I'd go play for a couple hours. And then if Kelly and I were gonna connect, I would get in the car and I would drive an hour from Columbus to exit 169 in Mansfield. From Akron to Mansfield. She would drive from Columbus to Mansfield, and we would meet at exit 169. And we found restaurants and a movie theater and a playground and all different kinds of things, a mall that we could go hang out. And we would go do that. And we would hang out with each other from like 8 p.m. to like midnight. And then I would drive an hour home. I would get home at 1 a.m. I would sleep for 3.5 hours, and I would get up and I would do it again. And I would do it as many days as we both were allowed, and we both could make it happen. And I would make it happen over and over. And she would make it happen over and over. And now the truth is, there are days where she looks at me and she says, will you go on a walk with me? And I say, I'm too tired. You know why? Because I'm not willing to do the work that it took to create to keep. And then you wonder why connection wanes. Because when we dated, we were idiots in the way we pursued each other. And so were you. And then we got married, and then kids, and then life, and suddenly what we did to create the connection, we stopped doing to keep the connection. And the reason the beloved and the darling are so in love is because they are working on their love. And they are working on it by taking the same energy that creating it took to keep it. And many of us this weekend, if we say, I want better, I'm gonna play to win, then what we have to do is we have to take what we had when we were trying to chase them and get them and win them and make them fall in love and connect to them. We need to take all that energy and we need to say, I'm gonna do that in keeping them. And so what I wanna do for a few minutes is really a counseling session. A counseling session about the principles that we see them doing in this passage that we could do that would help us harness the energy of creating into keeping. But to do this, what we're gonna have to recognize is these are incredibly practical realities. And I said, to better is not just knowing, it's also doing. So we're gonna talk about what we need to know, and then we're gonna have to tell ourselves that we're gonna need to do. In fact, another way to say it is if we're really going to get to connection by harnessing the energy that we use in creating to keeping, here's what we're gonna have to do. We're gonna have to repeatedly be practicing the practical. Repeatedly be practicing the practical. And I really want you to hear this. I'm not trying to say that every day has to be Valentine's Day. It doesn't. But what I am saying is an I will covenant needs to be followed by I will practices. An I will covenant needs to be followed by I will practices. So let's talk about what we see in the passage and what we should see in our marriages on a very practical scale, all right? Here's some things that we notice as we look at the beloved and the darling as they are creating their connection, and how do we keep our connection. Number one, first thing we need to do is this. We need to work to create We need to work to create a unique relationship. We need to work to create a unique relationship. There are things in your marriage that you should have that you don't have with your boys. Things that you should have that you don't have with your girls. Things that show that you are differentiated, that you are spending more time, more intentionality, more thought, more prayer, more passion. We see some of those in the text. They had nicknames for one another. Nicknames are not just superficial, stupid things. They are ways that you uniquely love someone in a special way. I have nicknames for my kids. I have a nickname for my wife. I've had a nickname for my wife for 20 some years. You have a way that you call them out uniquely. You have your own spots, your own places that you go. This is our spot. This is our memory. This is where we go to eat. This is where we go on the date. This is the thing that we do. When I squeeze your hand this way, it means this. Nobody else knows that, but you know that. You uniquely create these things in your relationship. And again, in dating, you did all of this. You were creative and you were spontaneous in every way possible, including where you were going to eat. And then you're married, and then it turns into the text. Pizza again? Because we stop harnessing the energy of creating, and we're not leveraging it for keeping. Now, guys, I get this. Stress, trauma, children, all of this messes with this. I get this. But what this is a pre-decision in your marriage to pursue this on a regular basis. I was listening to a message from a married couple this week, and I loved one of the things they said. They said that they made a decision before they got married, and then when they first were married, they said they made a decision to this day. They've been married 20 years. They said, we promised ourselves we were always gonna have a unique way of going away alone every single year, no matter what. And then as they were telling the message, the wife said this. She said, and then I remember when I had my daughter. And she said, my daughter was 6 months old. And I remember thinking, I don't wanna leave my daughter and go away and be with you. I don't want to go away. I want to stay with her. And he looked at her and he said, we pre-decided before marriage that the most important thing we could do for our kids was make sure our marriage was healthy. We're not running from them. We're doing something for them. And we decided this was going to happen before we faced this. And she said, and I went kicking and screaming, and I'm so glad I did. Because the moment we got to the place, it was fine. But I had to be committed to pursuing the unique relationship. But here's what happened. We let the kids get in the way. We let work get in the way. We let stress get in the way. We let difficulty get in the way. And we stop with the nicknames, and we stop with the creativity, and we stop with the spark. No. Better connection, seen, supported, in it together, comes from this reality where you say, the same stuff I did to get you is the same stuff I'm gonna do to keep you. It's not just to create the connection, but I'm gonna work to keep the connection. It's this idea that your spouse knows they are more special than everyone else, however you show that to them. That's the first thing they did. Here's the second thing that we see that they did in the text that's practical we've got to do. They canceled debts quickly. Now, we don't see this in the passage, but what we see in the passage is that they both had high character. And what I want to remind us is that high character in a marriage is going to administer itself or show up in a lot of different ways. The banner of love and protection, the idea of seeing that she had beautiful eyes, which meant she had beautiful character, that he was a charming, good guy. One of the most important things we can do in marriage is forgive quickly. If you do not forgive quickly, it will stay in your heart. And here's what you know. If it stays in your heart and you don't give mercy and you don't give grace and you don't give love and you're not patient, you will end up hurting the very person in the same way that they hurt you. We have to learn to forgive quickly. If you were to look at Kelly and I's text chain and you pull up Sweets on my phone, what you will see a regular pattern of is, I'm sorry. I need you to forgive me. And what you will see for her, forgiven. I'm sorry, forgiven, a regular pattern. It has to be quick. Now, I wish we did that all the time. There was a time the other day where old Pastor Keith looked at his wife and said, "You're not forgiven fast enough." And she said, "You're right, I'm not." What am I supposed to do? Well, I know your pastor and I'll talk to him about it. It doesn't always work, but great marriages work to serve one another by forgiving debts quickly. I just want to ask you this. Don't say it out loud. Are you holding on to something right now with your spouse that you need to forgive? That you need to forgive, that you need to let go. And here's what I know. When you were dating them, all that weird stuff about them you thought was special, and you were curious, and you were willing, and you forgave them because you were creating a connection. But to keep the connection, you got to forgive them. You got to let it go. Well, they're going to do it again. Yep, and so are you. It's part of being married. This also means, guys, that when people in our marriage hurt us, love says we don't keep a record of wrongs. We don't let stuff stew. And I'm going to meddle for a second. It also means we don't go to our friends and vent about our spouses. Because when we do that and we say, "I just need to get it off my chest," what you do is you create an image about your spouse to your friend that is not fair to your spouse. If you can't say it to them, you shouldn't be saying it. You got to get it out. You got to deal with it. You got to cancel it quickly. That's what it means to have character. And here's what I know when it messes up and we hurt each other. And I've used this before. Most of us in marriage, our marriages are made up of one turtle and one skunk. And you know which one you are. The turtle hides, the skunk keeps spraying it. And when things go bad, one of us turns into the turtle and one of us turns into the skunk. And the skunk ends up hurting and the turtle ends up disengaging. Nope, we got to forgive, we got to cancel it, we got to move on. Number three, how do we make sure we're working not just to create but to keep? We catch the foxes. We catch the foxes. They talked about this in verse 15. We deal with the things. The author says there are things that can hurt their relationship and they get rid of them. I made a list. What are things that can hurt your relationship? Financial rhythms. One of you's a spender, one of you's a saver. Past wounds from childhood or another relationship. Abuse of a hobby, conflict resolution, in-laws, parents, political perspectives, church expectations. One of you's clean, one of you's messy. Different perspectives on parenting. But you have to learn to be honest and vulnerable and patient and persistent and work through these problems. I told you guys this story before, but it's just good. And I'll tell you it in two examples, again, learning a little from Kel and I. I remember when we first got married, we first went to Kroger for the very first time in our marriage, and we're going up and down the aisles and we're getting our stuff, and we come to the syrup aisle, and Kelly grabbed a thing of syrup, and she started to put it in the cart. I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "I'm getting our syrup." I said, "That is not our syrup." She said, "No, it's the syrup we're gonna use." I said, "No, it's not." She said, "It's the syrup I've had my whole life." I said, "I don't care." And she said, "Put it back." She said, "No." And I went and grabbed the syrup I grew up with and I put it in the cart. And she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm getting our syrup." And in that moment, we realized it couldn't be her syrup and it couldn't be my syrup. It was gonna have to be our syrup. And in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, welcome to the rest of my life where we get to figure out all this stuff. Fast forward a few years, one of our kids wants to go to bed with a hat on, a cowboy hat on and boots. I said, "Kids don't go to bed with boots on. They don't go to bed with hats on." She said, "He's 4, what do you care?" I said, "Because I'm not raising a kid who's 18 sleeping in a cowboy hat and boots. Got to deal with it now." So we start fighting. It just goes crazy. All things break loose in our house as we're fighting about the hat and the boots and what's going to go on. And here's what I'll tell you. It was the first of figuring out how to catch the foxes in our parenting. Because her upbringing wasn't the same as my upbringing and our upbringing and coming it together. And if you don't deal with those things quickly, little foxes turn into big foxes and big foxes create big messes. And again, you did that when you were dating. You figured it out. And some of that was you figured it out as you canceled debts and you moved on. All right. Now they couldn't do this one, number 4, but we get to do this if we're married, but they wanted to do it. Number 4, if we're going to make sure we keep what we created, we got to close the bedroom door. Marriage isn't only for sex, but sex is for marriage and it is a part of it. And I've said it before that what the enemy of God works so hard to do is to keep those of us from being in bed who should be and get those of us in bed who shouldn't be. And many of us are in bed before we get married, then we stop being in bed after we get married. And yet when we are married, we are supposed to sleep together. And you should work through frequency and spontaneity and all those things, creativity, whatever it looks like. Some people will come up to me after a message like this and they'll say, okay, give me a number. How many times a week? It's not my job. But I know this. The Bible says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, your body doesn't belong to you and her body doesn't belong to her, and your bodies are each other's body, and you should not deprive each other except for a season. The Bible actually says of prayer and mutual consent. In other words, it should be normative. And if it's not, something's off. Well, Keith, we have little kids. I know. Get a hotel and a babysitter. Figure it out. It is part of what we are created to do. We have to figure out how to close the bedroom door. They're dating. They're creating the connection. And she's like, I can't wait to get his hands on me. And again, when you were dating, it was like, how far is too far? I don't know. What's the rules? Can we go? What's Jesus say? Oh, it's all right, it's all right, it's all right. And then we get married and it's like, have we ever thought about sleeping in separate beds, honey? Maybe it could work out. What you did to create, you do to keep, all right? And then the last one, number 5. Cultivate spiritual support. Cultivate spiritual support. She valued his protection. He valued her presence. And one of the ways that this happens is you serve each other spiritually. You talk about the Bible, you talk about church, you figure out how to serve one another, you figure out how to pray for each other's friends that you want to see reach Jesus. You include each other in spiritual endeavors. You want to know one of the best ways? You pray together. You know why it's so important to pray together? Because it's hard to dislike someone you're praying for and praying with. There's been times where I've been so mad at Kel or Kel's been so mad at me and then we prayed together. It's like, okay, we can't be mad anymore. We figure out how to practice spiritual support. Why? Because we're trying to harness the energy of the stuff that we did to create, we want to do to keep. So much more that could be said, but are you really working towards alone time or is alone time forced? Do you do ministry together as church life individual? Do you have a healthy sex life or is it just duty and function? Do you fight fairly about the problems or do you fight to win because it's personal? Are your praises public or are your problems public? Have you found shared hobbies or do your hobbies create tension? Do you fill the gap with trust or do you assume the worst? Do you understand your spouse or you just understand the idea of a spouse? Do you work hard what you did to create, to keep? All right, here's your homework assignment. Only for the married couples this week. Single people, keep praying for us because it's really hard this week, all right? Because as we step into this, here's the conversation we're gonna have. I want you to ask your spouse this question. Go up to him and say, how could I move towards you in one of these practical areas? How could I move towards you in one of these practical areas? What's one thing I could do in one of these areas that would serve you, that would be pursuit, that would step towards, that would reflect that I'm in it to win, that I'm fighting? Let's all ask one of those questions this week, see what they say, and then let's be committed to being faithful. And whatever they say, don't argue with them. Don't argue with them. You ask the question. So let's step into it and do it. I had a friend in high school who worked at the same restaurant I did, and he decided to save a bunch of his money. He wanted to buy an electric guitar. So he took some extra shifts, he didn't buy some things, he was real disciplined, and he bought this electric guitar. And I remember when he got it, I remember where it sat in his room, and every time I went into his room, it sat in the same spot, and it never looked used, and it never looked used, and never looked used. And I remember I said to him, do you ever play that guitar? He's like, actually, I don't. I'm like, dude, you spent so much time saving and preparing and chasing to go after that guitar. Why would you do all of that not to play it? You know, in marriage, we work so hard. We date, we court, we pursue. We spend money, we spend time. We buy an engagement ring. We plan showers and parties. We plan a giant wedding. We throw a huge celebration. We go on a honeymoon. We do all of this work to have an incredible marriage. And then for the next 60 years, we put it on the side and say, I don't know why I work so hard to get it. I'm not going to work hard to play it. I think sometimes in our culture, we work more on a wedding than we do on the marriage. Because we put so much energy into the front end to create connection rather than to keep connection. And if we're gonna keep connection, we're gonna repeatedly practice these practical steps. And anybody who thinks this is just crazy, let's just try. Let's just try. And let's see if we experience that connection, that feeling and function of being together, of seen and supported in a way that shows that we are serving one another. Let's pray together. God, this is like super earthy, tangible stuff. It's also hard. For some of us, there's things that are under the surface that are uncomfortable and difficult. But God, again, I pray that you would help us in our marriages. I pray that you would help us be better. I pray that you would help us to serve one another. And God, in all of this, it wouldn't just be so that we have better marriages. It would be so that you would be more seen in our marriages. Help us to put these practices repeatedly into practice. Pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.